Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rao's IAS Study Circle to get relevant material and important updates.
Hello everyone and welcome to Daily News Simplified, your one-stop solution to detailed analysis of current affairs published in the Delhi edition of Hindu newspaper. Articles dated 3rd of August 2021 are listed on your screen, and the timestamping for these articles is already given in the description box. So let us begin with the first article itself. The first article for today's discussion was published on page 8th of Delhi edition Hindu newspaper. This article actually talks about the recent visit which was made by the ex-Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott in India to push for trade talks. However, a discussion will not only be limited to the trade talks between India and Australia, but we will look this matter in much more details. We will confine our discussion mostly towards the international relation between India and Australia, their background, benefits of relations, current developments, and possible way forward in order to enhance the bilateral relations. Before that, let us go into a brief about the context of the article. See, what has happened that since 2014, India and Australia are working on Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, which is an advanced version of your free trade agreement between these countries. And if this agreement turn out to be the reality, both the countries will benefit from trade between themselves. However, since 2014, the talks on CECA has been stagnant. There was no headway which was achieved in these talks, and by now it has remained unresolved. And this was one of the reasons why the ex-Prime Minister has to visit India in order to bring this agreement into reality. Even before that, in 2020, important agreement was signed between both the nation through virtual meeting. As 2020 was a year of COVID-19 and most of the countries were locked, both the Prime Minister from India and Australia actually signed the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Agreement, in which both the countries would raise their level of trust required to improve the trade and investment flows among themselves. Apart from this, countries also signed mutual logistic support agreement, from which militaries of both the countries can use the basis, humanitarian and disaster relief cooperation, post-exercise benefits, and of course the passage related exercises, among many other. And lastly, in the same discussion, both the countries actually upgraded their 2+2 talks for further enhancement of strategic confidence. With this current scenario in mind, let us see the background of India-Australia relations. Soon before the independence, Jawaharlal Nehru, that is the first Prime Minister of India, actually believed Australia to be a natural part of Asia and invited the country to participate in ASEAN Relation Conference in Delhi, which held in 1947. However, the ties could not take a long road and there was still a trust deficit, because Australia, which was closer to the capitalist economies including United States, like many other countries, Australia saw India to be a less important nation when it comes to trade, strategic partnership and defense. Even between the era of Rajiv Gandhi to that of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, there was a gap of 3 decades between which no Prime Minister actually made a visit to Australia. This shows the kind of poor relationship these countries had. However, when there was an end of Cold War and India opened its economic door for the invitation of multinational companies, Australia was one of the nations who were very happy. And that was the first headway which led to the improvement of relationship. However, India's nuclear test in 1998 brought the trust deficit phase. But because US actually showed an interest in India's economy, so was Australia. So Australia since 2000 began upgrading their ties to strategic partnership and also included a joint declaration for security cooperation in 2009. And after 2009, both countries have been so much engaged in the defense exercises, including your Malabar exercise. And recently what we have seen is the rising of Quad grouping. And because of that, India has also been able to capture the uranium trade from Australia.
Given all these things, now let us look into why Australia is significant for India. Why India should have a good relation with Australia as such. The first one being your WHO's handling of pandemic. As we all know, in 2019 and early 2020, WHO was severely criticized for mishandling the COVID-19 crisis. However, Australia was one of the few countries that actually managed to combat COVID 19 so far through controlled adaptation, by which the COVID virus had been suppressed to very low level. And because of this, India required Australia to be its close partner in order to have fight against the COVID 19. Australia also supports India's candidature in an expanded UN Security Council as a permanent member. When it comes to health, safe food, as well as supply chain, Australia has actually assured India for direct to consumer and consumer packed goods, which could transform global supply chains. Well, India is open to those nations which can help in building the supply chains in the food producing industry. And Australia, along with New Zealand, are the best choice on international platform. When it comes to the trade, well, India and Australia are a very good trading partners when it comes to the uranium, coal, strategic elements, and of course, your consumer goods. Based on the data provided by the Australian government, well, Australia is the 12th largest economy in the world, and based on that, India can find a good market as well as a good supplier of products in the bilateral trade. Australia also has a reservoir of higher education, scientific research, and of course human development. As you must have read that Australia are among the top scorer on human development indices. So India can learn from Australia on that behalf also. When it comes to the pandemic, not only with the COVID-19, India can also learn in dealing with the issues of pollution, with the issues of climate change, and with the issues of conservation of biodiversity, which are also impacted in a pandemic like manner. Australia can also help India on the agricultural cooperation because majority of Australia's geographical region lies in the dry zone. And because of that, they have developed a very high scientific methods to go for dry land farming, that too with a higher efficiency. Australian agribusiness sector has a research and development capacity. They have experience and technical knowledge to help India's food industry to improve its supply chain productivity and its sustainability. And lastly, Australia is also important for India's strategic importance, especially in the case of Indo-Pacific. Australia is also important for the defense cooperation with special focus to the naval exercises. As Australia also share the border with the Indian Ocean, Australia and India are the largest defense power when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region. As Australia becomes an important for India to have a good confidence building in terms of security. With this, now we will also look into the current status of India-Australia relations, starting with the dialogue platform. Well, of late, India and Australia have come on different platforms when it comes to the dialogue one. We are partners on East Asia Summit. We are also the dialogue partners in Indian Ocean Rim Association. We are now partners at Quad platform, and we are also going for 2+2 dialogues. Major of these platforms have provided the leaders of both the countries to come together and sit and resolve their issues. There are also some trilateral dialogues between India, Australia, Japan, between India, Australia, and Indonesia. And through these trilateral dialogues, India has been able to resolve the ocean-related problems to a much larger extent. Coming to the political relations, well, they have met in 2014. However, CECA remained unresolved. And in 2020, which we have already discussed, they have signed multiple frameworks. When it comes to the defense cooperation, of course, there are many agreements which both the countries have, including your mutual logistic support agreement. We have wide shipping information exchange in which trade related consignment and their movement between both these countries are bilaterally exchanged. They have also conducted the AUSINDEX exercise in which AUS stands for Australia and IN for India. They have conducted a bilateral naval exercise, and along with this they have also have major programs where Australia is going to be a permanent inclusion in Malabar exercise. The most important thing which India can get from Australia is your Blue Water Navy policy. Through this policy, Australia can provide a better hand to India while combating the security related issues in the waters or maybe in the international waters. Australia is among those nations which have very robust navy when it comes to fighting the international crimes, including pirates and trafficking. When it comes to the diaspora, as of now, there are almost 2% of Australia's population which are of Indian origin. And apart from this, India is also one of the top sources of skilled immigrants to the country of Australia. When it comes to the education, well, there are many initiatives, topmost being your New Colombo program, in which many of the Australian students have been undergoing the training in India. Apart from this, there are hundreds and thousands of Indian students who are also getting education in various universities of Australia. On economic relations, the bilateral trade between both the countries are over $30 billion. However, it has been fluctuating because of the COVID crisis. And lastly, the most important thing in the recent manner was the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement. Despite the fact that India is not a member of Nuclear Supply Group, Australia agreed to provide a nuclear fuel, that is uranium, to India for peaceful purposes. Given all these relevances from Australia, let us now understand something from the geographical point of view. In this, we will utilize the map of Asia and Australia to understand further. Now look at this map. This is your Australia, which is on the southeast direction to India. However, India is important for Australia for various purposes. How? Australia's imports on oil, which passes from a narrow strait between Maldives to India, could become a matter of security if Australia does not have a good partnership with India. Secondly, Australia is also the extended neighborhood when it comes to India-ASEAN relation, and a strong India-ASEAN trade can definitely help India-Australia building their own comprehensive trade policy. Australia is also important for India's link to New Zealand because Australia lie in the midway. And with that, Australia can also help India in building up the container ports in order to trade in a far more volume to New Zealand. And lastly, when it comes to the security of Indian Ocean, the western side of Australia can harbor large number of ports and of course defense establishments where India can park their own naval vessels in order to act as a net security provider in Indian Ocean. With all these positive points in mind, now let us look into what are the hindrances or what are the problems which both these countries are facing when it comes to their bilateral relations. So, first one being fall in FDI. Well, statistics from India's Ministry of Commerce has indicated that there is a fall of FDI from Australia to India from 518 millions to 260 millions between 2012 to 2018. Well, this shows that the economic interest of Australia in India is on the downward trend. The second one being, of course, your unfavorable balance of trade against India. India's trade deficit with Australia is on the upper side since 2001 and 2. And since then till now, it has been over 18 years, India's balance of trade with Australia has not improved, despite the fact that both are targeting to achieve comprehensive economic cooperation agreement to go for more liberal trade regime. The third one being, of course, your Chinese factor. That Chinese expansive One Belt, One Road initiative project is also hindering the growth of those nations which are not partner to this. Both Australia and India are not part of OBOR project. And because of that, they are finding it tough to trade with those nations which are actually part of it, including your ASEAN nations, East Asian nations, and many of the African one. This Chinese project has also increased the unsustainability of the debt on many of the members of this project. And because of that, India and Australia could not have better trade relations with those member nations. Next being your non-trade barriers such as sanitary and phytosanitary measures. As we have discussed previously, Australia has one of the highest ranking on human development indices. Their standard of living is extremely high and they have very high standard when it comes to the food safety. And because of that, they are one of those countries which have been imposing the sanitary and phytosanitary measures on food imports which are arising from nations like India. Similarly, if Australia has a better sanitary measures, they have very likelihood to get a good control in the domestic market of India. So let's compare the milk. Australia and New Zealand are among those countries which have very high quality of dairy products. On the other hand, India's demand for dairy product is increasing on a quantum basis. If we keep that in mind, India's export of milk to Australia would remain negligible given the sanitary and phytosanitary measures. But when Australia starts exporting its milk product to India, it will find a very large base of consumers. But that would definitely hurt India's own domestic producer when it comes to the dairy industry. In that case, sanitary and phytosanitary measures are actually hurting India more than ever. The next one being your racist attack. As we have discussed, India is one of the highest source of immigrants, which include the students who go out to Australia to study. And because of the racial differences, because of the historical differences, there have been a racist attack on Indian students, and because of them, the relations actually become bitter, especially during the last government which was in power in both the nations. And lastly, both the nations do not have a coherent Indo-Pacific strategy. Now, what does it mean? For Australia, a free and open Indo-Pacific means establishing a regional architecture with fellow democratic countries to help maintain the rule-based order as Chinese become the most powerful actor in the region. On the other hand, India is demanding for free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Apart from this, India is also looking for a larger role as a net security provider and is trying to have a good stronghold when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, which is not the case of Australia. With these concerns in mind, let us look into what are the possible way forwards which we can use as a nation. Well, both nations should continue on utilizing the current innovations in digital trade. Well, we are talking about fourth industrial revolution. So why only limit ourselves to the agriculture and dairy products? Both countries should leverage this technological innovation also. They must go for improving their trade situations with opening more of comprehensive economic and cooperation agreement, if possible also move towards comprehensive economic partnership agreement. They should also leverage the trilateral dynamics between ASEAN, Australia and India, which I have already discussed through the map, that Australia can act as an extended neighborhood to India when we talk about India-ASEAN relations. They also need to upgrade their 2+2 dialogues for more engagements, if possible on a quarterly basis. Along with this, they should also have an engage and balanced strategy towards China. They should not start considering China as their common enemy. However, they must take the advantage which China is as of now throwing on them. For instance, there are many nations which are complaining about the Chinese neo-capitalism and neo-imperialist policies. India and Australia together can act in order to provide as a buffer and as an alternate solution to Chinese aggressiveness. Apart from this, both nations can work together to bring more and more countries. For example, there are countries like South Africa which have very good relations with India. Apart from that, South Africa is also part of IPSA and your BRICS grouping. With this, South Africa, India and Australia along with Indian Oceanic Rim associations can play major role when it comes to Indo-Pacific strategy. So Australia and India can bring more nations into talks for Indo-Pacific expansion, Indo-Pacific security. And lastly, both nations should focus more upon increasing the soft diplomacy, which include your cultural exchanges, education, Bollywood, sports, most importantly being your cricket, and your people-to-people exchanges. They should also focus more on bringing more dialogues through track to diplomacy, in which non-government actors come to play in order to resolve the bilateral issues. With this discussion in place, let us now take an important question attached to this article. Well, this is a practice question. Question says that relation between India and Australia have of late improved, given the rising of new dimensions in geopolitics. In new dimensions, you must quote about Chinese interference and, of course, the international security concerns. In international concerns, you must write about Chinese aggressiveness policy, rising of Quad, rising of Russia-China relationships, and of course, the Indo-Pacific. Given all these points in place and the discussion we have conducted, you will be in a position to answer this question in a much smoother manner. With this, now we'll move to the next article for the day. This article was published on first page of Delhi edition Hindu newspaper and talks about the recent changes in the external sector of India. The article says that there was at $35 billion, export rose at 34% over and above the pre-COVID level. It simply means that if the exports in pre-COVID level, that is in July 2019, was around 100 crore rupees, then in July 2021, that is right now the current status, it is going to be 134 crore, which is definitely a good sign because we are not comparing what we had during COVID period of 2020. We are actually comparing it with what we were having in the normal situation. It itself shows that India's export growth is improving. However, the situation is India's trade deficit is still very high, and the reason being that imports of gold is at 145%. See, whenever you read these kind of articles, first of all, data is not important. You are not required to learn 35 billion or 34% or any other thing. The point is that you should know what is the context of the article, what article is actually talking about. So this article is talking about two things: rise in exports and continuation of trade deficit. And second thing which you should know is why this is happening. The reason being simple: exports are rising because there is a surge in international demand as countries are opening more and more now because of the vaccination programs and of course diligent policies of the government. Exports are increasing. Secondly, we are talking about the base effect. So given the low base rate, now exports are rising. On the other hand, the deficit in the trade is simply because there is a high ratio of gold imports. Gold and petroleum product are the top importing goods for India. And if top importing goods see any kind of surge or sudden increase in the demand, we definitely face higher trade deficits. So whenever these kind of articles appear in the newspaper, you should have the criteria of understanding what has happened and why it has happened. Apart from this, the one thing which UPSC has been focusing for the past 2-3 years in their pre-examination or prelims examination is the trends. So when it comes to the trend, they may ask you about a particular event or a particular commodity or a particular thing in the economy and its past 5 or 10 years trend. How it was acting, how it was behaving, was it fluctuating or was it increasing or decreasing in a continuous manner, so on and so forth. So whenever you read the economic survey, read this in this particular manner. Reading economic survey line by line and going through the details of the diagrams is not important. However, basic data and figures should help you to understand the trend in the current scenario. So this is the maximum advantage you have to take from the economic survey. So now let us understand how to utilize economic survey in this regard. This diagram and many following diagrams have been taken from the economic survey of this year. And from this diagram, we will understand that how in-depth study is required for the economic survey. This diagram shows you the merchandise trade balance of India, its export and imports when it is compared between 2018 to 2021. Now, this diagram simply shows that in the past 3 years, India's balance of trade has been in the negative phase. As you can see, all these are below zero, so it means negative phase. And the highest negative achievement was minus 49%. And the lowest was minus 9.8%. Other than this is not required. And why this minus 9.8% was there? Why we have so small trade deficit? The reason was lockdown effect. See, they have already provided the answers in the economic survey. Why trade deficit was low in first quarter of 2020? Because the demand of imports was very low. When imports went low, the trade deficit automatically reduced. As you can see, the imports were at almost minus 52 to 53%, while exports were close to 39 to 40% in negative format. This simply shows that there was a kind of low demand scenario and low consumption scenario which actually helped India's external sector. Apart from this, nothing else is required. From this table in the economic survey, we can understand that what are those goods and services where India is having favorable terms of trade. It means that which of these products and how much of them are actually benefiting India's trade. The most important or the highest benefit which India actually occurs come from your pharmaceutical and biologicals. Apart from that, we also benefit from different other products such as your petroleum products, which always almost remains high. And apart from this, we also benefit from jewelry, gold, and related products. So these three products actually help India to gain a favorable balance of trade. But when it comes to the unfavorable balance of trade, that is when we have balance of trade in negative phase, what are those goods which are responsible for this? Well, in this, the highest share goes to definitely your petroleum, that is the crude oil. So highest imports actually are from the crude oil. The second most notorious product is your gold, followed by coal, coke, and other products. So these three are important and being notorious for your negative balance of trade. And lastly, we should see that India's merchandise trade balance with major countries. In this scenario, the best example is your US, with which India has the highest trade surplus. On the other hand, China is the country where India has highest negative balance of trade. So in both this scenario, you can see that which countries are beneficial to India and which are not. Another important thing which you need to focus on this table is that exports to US has reduced, imports to the US has reduced. However, the trade balance has increased. On the other hand, when we talk about China, exports have increased, imports have reduced. And that is the reason trade deficit is low. And both these things are very, very good for Indian economy because the surplus is rising and the deficit is falling. And this is the trend in the last 2 years which we have observed, and you should keep this in mind while preparing for your prelims examination. And in similar manner, you should prepare many other tables which are given in the economic survey to prepare on the trend related questions. With this now, I'll leave you with the important question attached to this article. So read this question carefully and answer in the comment box. And now let us move to the next article for the day. This article was published on page 10 of Delhi edition Hindu newspaper, and this article actually talks about a very, very good initiative undertaken by the central government with the name e-rupee. E-rupee, which is developed by National Payment Corporation of India, is a new online payment initiative. However, it is different from what we are currently using in the form of UPI or maybe the e-wallets which you are using with different companies like Paytm, PhonePe and whatnot. This initiative of e-rupee has very, very unique functions, and they are extremely helpful not only for the financial integration of the economy but also for the rural development and reducing the corruption. So let us see how. When it comes to the basic features of this initiative, well, e-rupee is person and purpose specific. It is a cashless digital payment solution which is also helpful in bringing the contactless instrument for digital payment medium in India. We all know that currently India is using contactless payment in the form of UPI, e-wallets, NEFTs and many other. But in this initiative, what we will have is that there will be a dedicated QR code or an SMS which will be generated and which act as a e-voucher. E here means electronic voucher, which will be delivered to the mobile phone of a beneficiary. It could be used as a voucher in case of payments. For instance, let's say medical treatment, education, travels, beneficiary schemes such as your National Food Security Act, your Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana and whatnot. The important thing is this payment medium will be used for one time only. So once you have utilized your SMS or QR code in order to make a payment, it will not be used for the second time. So it is just one time user. Another important thing which is very, very good for this program is that it could be used for offline purposes. How it is done? Well, we will look that very shortly. The one thing which a beneficiary has to do is that whenever they receive the SMS or a QR code under e-rupee, what they will do? They will take it to the service provider which will get it scanned and make the payment. It can work on the basic phones, so there is no need for having a smartphones, which is actually one of the hindrance in providing the financial inclusion to the rural areas, because they either do not have smartphones. If they do not have better internet connectivity. So right now, this can be used in the smallest possible mobile phones. And lastly, it does not require any physical interface for transaction. So it is not that you require to carry cash with you or you require to carry a paper based voucher. It is not in the physical form. It is like an SMS. Now, how does it function? Let us see. Well, first of all, any entity or maybe the government will transfer fund to a bank. The bank then will generate a QR code or SMS which will be sent to a particular mobile number. This mobile number will be of a particular beneficiary, let's say you and me. The voucher is then sent to the beneficiary. The beneficiary will then take this digital voucher to the service provider. The service provider will scan this voucher, and this scanning will be undertaken in a digital format through a centralized server, and that scanning will be recorded in a digital manner. After the clearance, the transfer will be made direct from the bank to the service provider and the payment will be done. After this, the service provider will service the delivery. Now, in order to understand this in a much simpler manner, let us take an example of Ayushman Bharat, in which we are providing for secondary and tertiary healthcare facility. Let's say there's a person from a rural India and he wants his wife or maybe children to get a treatment, and the treatment cost almost 1 lakh rupee. Now what will happen? This person is entitled to gain funds from the government. However, government is reluctant to provide the cash in their hand because the cash can be misused. Even if they provide direct benefit transfer to this person, there is no guarantee that entire 1 lakh rupee will be spent on the operation of a particular person. So what to do? Now government will transfer 1 lakh rupee, let's say, to a particular bank, SBI. SBI already has a number of the beneficiary from that rural area. SBI will now transfer a message, which is a coded message, which could also be in the form of QR code to the beneficiary's mobile number. Now beneficiary will take this QR code to a particular hospital where he or she is likely to get treatment. The hospital will then scan that number or the QR code in order to make it an authentic transaction. After the authentication, the funds will directly move from SBI account to the hospital, and hospital will then agree to provide the operation to that wife or to the children. Now this is how it is going to function. The best thing which we have right now with this scheme is there is no cash involved. Secondly, a beneficiary cannot use this voucher for any other purposes. If this 1 lakh rupee was meant to get treatment in a particular hospital, this 1 lakh cannot be used to buy ration. This 1 lakh cannot be used for agriculture purposes or even for the basic consumption needs of a particular person. That means, as we have discussed, it is a person and a purpose specific cashless digital payment solution to a particular person for a particular purpose. Now let us look at the basic benefit of this initiative. This initiative, if taken up by the private sector also, would provide a leverage to a new system for employee welfare. So now employees who are employed in a particular sector can get social security and other benefit, and in fact, large corporates can utilize e-rupee for their corporate social responsibility. Take the same example. If here, instead of government, if let's say there is Tata Corporations or maybe Reliance Industries and they want to make a corporate social responsibility of, let's say, 10 crore rupees, they can follow the same process and assure that their money is not spent on any corrupt practices. It will ensure a leak-proof delivery of welfare services in the country. It is also a safe method as there is no physical currency involved, and also there is no physical voucher is involved. Being a prepaid in nature, as we have said, it is a prepaid, as bank already has money before even sending the SMS or QR code. So it is a prepaid in nature, hence it assures timely payment to the service provider. So in this case, hospital has received the payment on time. So there is no delay in that. Without the involvement of any intermediaries, except bank or the financial institution, there is no other person. It's a direct contact between the beneficiary and the service provider. Along with this, there is no need for a bank account. So you does not require a bank account in order to avail this service. How? The bank or SBI in this case just require a phone number or a mobile number of a particular person. They does not require any kind of account number. Will not be transferred to any number or account number. Only a code will be transferred. Money will be transferred only to the service provider, not to the beneficiaries. And lastly, it could help in meeting the financial inclusion targets in India because it will help in development of rural India through financial inclusion, because rural India as of now does not have the technological abilities, financial capacities, financial literacies, and top of all, they lack infrastructural needs of banking sector. So given all these initiatives, if e-rupee turn out to be a universal in its approach, it could definitely be a game changer for the financial inclusion and of course your inclusive growth. With this now, I'll leave you to an important question attached to this article. So read this question carefully and answer in the comment box. Let us now move to the next article for the day. This article was published on page 7 of Delhi edition Hindu newspaper and is part of the editorial section of the newspaper. This article actually talks about an important debate which is going on across the nation regarding the right to privacy versus national security. However, we will take only those points from this article which are relevant for the UPSC preparation. So, we will keep ourselves dedicated to the syllabus of General Studies Paper 2 with special focus to the constitutional matters, legal matters and international matters which can help us to resolve this issue. Now, the point is that author has argued that India has a regime where government can use its power to restrict the right to privacy. As we know, under Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India case, right to privacy was made as an integral part of individual's right. However, like in this case and in many other cases, Supreme Court has repeatedly said that right to privacy, like many other rights, is not absolute and state that its government can make law to restrict the right to privacy. However, if a government try to make that kind of law in the country, they should follow these three important points. First being your legality, which postulates that existence of law, that is, state action must have legislative mandate. So executive cannot take a unilateral decisions in order to restrict the privacy. The second one is need. It is defined in terms of legitimate state aim. That is, there must be a legitimate purpose of the government in order to restrict somebody's privacy. And the third one, that is proportionality, which ensures a rational nexus between the objects and the means adopted to achieve them. However, India has been one of those nations which has seen a gross violations of right to privacy on the matter of national security. In fact, there have been instances where individuals who have spoken out their mind were targeted on the case of national security and have been framed under various stringent rules, including your sedition law. And because of this, there are a number of negative repercussions which are arising out of the snooping activity, especially undertaken by the government. We are not at all focusing on whether the government began or whether the government initiated any kind of snooping activity using the Pegasus software. However, we are focusing more on the philosophical aspect of the topic. Because of the initiative undertaken by the government in the name of national securities, we have following issues related to the snooping. First of all, it violates the right to privacy and dignity as per Article 21. It suppresses the political and social freedom of individuals, especially those who are social right activists. It also suppresses any kind of dissent, especially the political dissent of the society. It also tries to reflect the autocratic regime of the ruling government. It violates the international principles which are laid down under Declaration of Human Rights and International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It also makes we the people from whom sovereignty derived as susceptible. It also undermines the rule of law because the action which are taken in order to snoop into individual life is mostly based on the executive orders and not backed by the legislation. And lastly, it creates a confidence deficit between the individuals and the investigating organizations in the country. So, as of now, what are the international measures which are available in order to protect the privacy? In previous articles and many of the previous DNS, we have discussed about the national initiatives and the remedial measures. But this time we will focus on the international initiative. The first one being your Universal Declaration of Human Rights, including Article 12, which says no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his or her privacy, family, home, correspondence, and nor to attack upon his honor and reputation. Similarly, Article 17 of International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights says that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary or unlawful interference with his family, privacy, or home. 2014 Annual Report of United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights says that digital communication technologies offer promise of improved enjoyment of human rights by amplifying the voices of human rights. Hence, they should not be subjected to scrutiny at extreme levels. And lastly, Resolution 68 and 167, which was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly, provided the following four important measures, including the reaffirmed the right to privacy, reaffirmed that online rights are equal to the offline rights. This is a key word. This is a very important word which you can use on multiple grounds. Thirdly, they have called upon the member states to respect and protect the right to privacy. And lastly, they want to establish and maintain the existing independent, effective, and domestic oversight mechanism. With this, all these points could be utilized for a better answer writing in your journal studies paper 2, not only limited to right to privacy, but also extended to any question which is attached to human rights, digital rights, gender rights, and many others. So whenever you go through the DNS videos or any other material whichever you are referring to, always try to utilize single example on multiple space in order to save your time and effort, and with limited amount of study material, you will be in a position to understand better, write better, and score more. With this guys, now I'll sign off for today's DNS and leave you with the question of the day.